On Your Side Tonight continues now. Good evening and thanks for staying with us at 7:30. The White House announced this week the U.S. intelligence community is considering the three most recent unidentified objects shot down over North America were being used for commercial or benign purposes. Certainly been a dramatic chain of events these past few weeks, with the Carolinas, of course, one of the stages here in this national story. The U.S. has shot down 4 objects this month, beginning with a suspected Chinese spy balloon that was brought down off the coast of Myrtle Beach back on February 4th. Since then, 3 more unidentified objects have been shot down over North America. You had the one Friday over Alaska, one Saturday over Canada, and then one Sunday over Lake Huron near Michigan. But beyond the recent headlines, you might not know these are not the first occasions where the U.S. has fought against enemy espionage hovering in our skies. As Steve Crump reports, in previous events, the stakes have been even higher and even cost American lives.
The bombing of Pearl Harbor wasn't the first and only time American soil suffered attacks during World War II. 3 years later, during 1944, more aggression came from the Asian continent.
This is one of the Japanese paper balloons, identified by the code name Paper. The unit carries up to 4 10-pound incendiaries and a central payload of about 60 pounds of incendiaries or anti-personnel HE bombs to drop on the west coast of the United States and Canada.
Fighting back meant relying on the skills of the Army's 555 Parachute Infantry Battalion, better known as the Triple Nickels. They were the nation's first African-American paratroopers whose unit was created during World War II. And rather than being dispatched overseas, their assignment meant taking on balloon bombs.
Of course, the Japanese balloons were landing as far north as Canada and as far south as Mexico. Some balloons even landed in the streets of Boise, Idaho. That's how widespread it was.
Unlike the Chinese spy balloon that was shot out of the sky over the waters near South Carolina, the 1940s conflict here in America resulted in paratroopers taking on the name of smoke jumpers during a government exercise titled Operation Firefly.
And we went out there and we trained a couple of weeks learning how to jump into trees, which is something we were taught not to do. And we learned how to build fire lanes, and we had a pick and a mattock. Those were our tools.
We went to Pendleton Field, Oregon. That was an air base initially. In fact, that's where Jimmy Doolittle and some of his pilots trained there. And they left, and we went to Camp Pendleton.
When we got to Oregon, then they split us up. Half of us went up to Chico, California, but now it's just like going out to jump in battle. You had your gear and everything with you, and they take you out up in those mountains and round, and they drop you this side of the fire, and then you had to climb and get through the fires, just like, you get into something else.
Lives were lost. While members of the Triple Nickels all survived, a woman and 5 children in Oregon were killed after coming into contact with one of the balloons.
The American government was actually pretty smart about how they approached the entire Japanese aerial bomb.
Military historian Patrick O'Donnell says the government's plan was to keep things quiet regarding this Japanese invasion.
They completely suppressed any sightings of the bombs or any from the press and everybody else. And what it did is it had an impact on fooling the Japanese into believing that the bombs were not even reaching the United States.
That is fascinating. You think now with all cell phones and social media, you couldn't do that, possibly. Our Steve Crump joins us here in studio to talk more about this. What was the Japanese strategy behind these balloons? What were they trying to accomplish?
More chaos,
yeah.
Wreaking havoc in a lot of ways. And there was a thought that they were headed to the west coast of the United States, a lot of forest land all the way from Washington State down to the Mexican border, and that was where those balloons were targeted. And in some instances, you could find especially from the video we saw, that they did in fact create forest fires.
We probably could tell by the video or the interviews that those were several years ago when they happened. What sort of intrigued you as you were researching this story?
Well, you know, it's been interesting the last few days, Jamie, when we've heard a lot about this Chinese spy balloon. And there's a documentary that I'd done several years ago for public television called Nichols from Heaven. That's where those interviews came from, for full disclosure. Some of those individuals have passed on, but the stories are just amazing. Not only from the perspective of, from the standpoint of where they ended up having to do this particular chore of fighting forest fires. In World War II, African-American paratroopers did not participate in overseas kinds of operations. And so as a result of their assignments here in the States, in some instances, they were required to fold the parachutes of white paratroopers who made it to D-Day.
So they couldn't go overseas, but they were able to fight here, did these fires, and drop in these really heroic situations and dangerous situations, as you point out.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure in some regards, the risk that they found there perhaps may have been more riskier than what they could have encountered overseas.
It's one of these pieces of history, again, that you bring to us that so many of us are just unfamiliar with. Why is that?
It just happened in terms of, you know, seeing what was going on with this whole Chinese spy balloon scenario. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute. This isn't the first time that this has happened.
Right.
I mean, we've had other kinds of, I guess, assaults from Asia, you know, coming through the skies and over the U.S. But back in the 1940s, you didn't have the political witch hunts, the blaming, the shaming, and or the finger pointing that you have today.
Yeah, a fascinating insight and important historical perspective in all of this. Steve, as always, appreciate you stopping by and sharing it with us.
Enjoy this one tonight, Jamie.
Absolutely, great stuff indeed.